Melissa Spence, and I'm the administrator for the Program for Jewish Civilization. And I'd like to apologize. Our director, Yossi Shane, is in Israel, and our executive committee chair, Bob Lieber, is also giving a talk. So I'm pleased to introduce Professor Jeffrey Peck. But before I do, I just wanted to bring your attention to some information on the table about our program. There's our newest publication on politics and memory, and there's also a sign-in sheet if you'd like to be added to our email list or our mailing list. And also there's a lecture coming up on Thursday afternoon that's called Israel at the Crossroads, Critical Theory, Open Society, and the Dignity of Difference by Professor Hanan Alexander from Haifa University in Israel. So you're welcome to attend that as well. Hope to see you there. As I said, I'm pleased to introduce Professor Jeffrey Peck, who's just finished a book entitled Being Jewish in the New Germany, out by Rutgers University Press. And he's going to talk to us a little bit more about the topic. Professor Peck is a professor in the Communication, Culture, and Technology Department, and also a senior fellow in residence at AICGS, which is the American Institute for Contemporary German Studies. Thank you. And he was the first director of the Canadian Center for German and European Studies at York University and the Université de Montreal. He was also co-director of the Institute of European Studies at York University and the University of Toronto. He received his MA from the University of Chicago and has received his Ph.D. in Comparative Literature from the University of California in Berkeley. And taught and was a faculty member at the University of Washington in Seattle, the Department of German Comparative Literature, and in the program in Jewish Studies. And also a faculty member at the Center for German and European Studies and the German Department, and was the director of the Jewish Studies Initiative at Georgetown. He has a much fuller and extended and lengthy bio, but I'd like to just introduce him and welcome you to the Program for Jewish Civilization. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Melissa, and I want to thank the program and Yossi Shane, Jacques Liederblau, and Bob Lieber for the invitation. And it's nice to be able to give a talk here among my students and colleagues and interested people from the community. What I want to do today is not give you a formal lecture, as you can read the book. But what I want to do is talk about the book broadly and how it came to be and why I wrote it and some of the major issues that I touch upon in the book, and also some of the claims that I make at the end of the book. I think I want to start out by saying that in the context of my work here at Georgetown, in some ways this book is also a fruition of all the various programs and departments that I've been affiliated with over the course of many years. The book obviously is about Germany. It's also about Jews in Germany, but it's also about, as my students will know and familiar with, this book is also about the relationship between the ethnographer, the person writing the story, and about my relationship to the place and the people that I'm studying. And so in that way, the book is, the title of the book, Being Jewish in the New Germany, is as much about what it is like to be Jewish and living in Germany as it is about me as an American Jew who has studied Germany for so many years and my relationship to my own identity and also the identity of the people that I have interviewed and observed and studied for so many years. This book is a continuation in some ways of a book that I did in the mid-90s with a colleague in anthropology, which was called Sojourners, The Return of German Jews and the Question of Identity, where not knowing that the Berlin Wall was going to collapse and that Germany would be reunified and the Soviet Union would disintegrate, we had a project which was to interview Jews from Berlin who had left during the Second World War and gone to Allied countries, primarily to the United States and the Soviet Union, and interviewed them after they had returned, obviously in the 90s, about their lives living in both East and West Berlin. And we were interested, of course, also there in the question of how people construct their identities as being Jewish, being German, being communist, being social democratic, whatever that might be. And I bring this up because this was the first project that really focused on this question of identity and how people identify themselves and how people come to understand where they belong, the communities they belong to. That book's trajectory ended with the unification of Germany in 1990. And after that, continuing to be in Germany, I realized, as I had when I was doing the Sojourners Project, that although I had never worked on the topic of Jewish topics in my work in Germany, that being a Jew, an American Jew who works and lives in Germany, one was always confronted with the question, why do you study Germany? Why do you speak German? What's your relationship to Germany? And it's always been a fraught topic. And that's what brought me to start focusing my research on this topic. After we got caught up in our first project in the fall of the wall and unification and so on, I continued to go to Germany and observe what was happening in the Jewish community. And it's now a little over 15 years after this has all happened. And it was time, already some years ago, I thought, to do a book on the dramatic changes that had taken place in Germany since the unification. And the dramatic changes that have taken place in Germany have changed dramatically, more than anyone could ever have imagined, what it means to be Jewish in Germany. And the main, of course, and the deciding factor in all of this was the fact that with the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was the opportunity for thousands and thousands, literally thousands of Jews to leave the former Soviet Union. And although many of them have gone to Israel and to the United States, there began, shortly after the fall of the wall, a great influx of Jews from the former Soviet Union to Germany. And of course, that was also a question, why are they going to Germany of all places? So I say all of this as a backdrop to my own motivation for the project, but this has also become part of the subject of the book. And this is why in the book, there are 8 chapters in the book. What I try to do is look at the issue of being Jewish in Germany from a number of different viewpoints. The other main reason that I wrote this book was that as an American Jew who had been living in Germany off and on for over 20 years, and who had developed a great affection for Germany, at the same time having a certain ambivalence, I thought from many conversations that I had and what I observed was that many Americans, and particularly Jewish Americans, really didn't know what was going on in Germany. They didn't know the changes that had taken place. They didn't know what the German government was doing in terms of their attempts to come to terms with the past. And they also weren't aware of this incredible immigration that was changing the constituency and landscape of Jewish life in Germany. Just to put those facts on the table, before the war in Germany, there were approximately 550,000 Jews in Germany. At the end of the war, most of the Jewish population was decimated, and as many of you know, maybe some of you don't know, there was, immediately at the end of the war, there was the establishment of displaced persons camps for people who either found themselves in Germany, who had been liberated from the camps, or who had been moving across Europe and found themselves in Germany. So these camps that were scattered around primarily southern Germany were really way stations. The idea was, and this was stated categorically from major Jewish organizations that there was not going to be a Jewish life in Germany, that the people who were in these camps would move on to other places, and that this would be the end of Jewish life and the end of a very rich tradition that had been in existence for so many hundreds of years. But that's not the way it worked, and many people found themselves living in Germany, staying in Germany, as ambivalent or unhappy as they were with that. But even in 1989 or 1988, before the wall came down, there were maybe 20 to 30,000 Jews in what was called West Germany. And there were maybe 500 Jews in what was called East Germany, the communist part of Germany. Now these numbers, as I'll explain as I talk about the project, really only have to do with the numbers of people, at least in the West, who were officially members of the Jewish community. There were many more people who were scattered in Germany who might have been Jewish or defined themselves as Jewish in various ways. And now in Germany, and the numbers are changing all the time, the estimation is that there are probably around 120,000 Jews who are in the United Germany, but those are only the Jews who also are registered in the community. There are many, many others who don't affiliate with the community, who are not accepted as being Jewish through the rules of the community. And some estimate up to maybe 200,000. The point is, in all of this, well, there are a number of points. One is that this influx of Jews from the former Soviet Union has changed, as I said, the constitution of the community. It's made the Jewish community in Germany now the third largest in Europe after England and France. It's made it the fastest growing Jewish community in Europe, and I think it's also claimed that it's the fastest growing Jewish community in the entire world. Where else are so many Jews moving to some place and then affiliating with the community and then identifying themselves as Jews? So the point here is that there is incredible dynamism in the last 15 years in what's been going on in Germany. I do want to say that in this project of talking about Jewish life in Germany, and I think ultimately coming up with a fairly optimistic picture, this doesn't mean that the book is only optimistic. It was very important for me to chronicle the ups and downs, not only of the community, but the ups and downs of the way the Germans and the German government deals with not only Jews, but with other minorities. And I have a whole chapter, which a lot of people find particularly interesting, on the relationship between Jews and Turks. The Turks are the largest immigrant population in Germany and play a very, very special role. So there are many parts of the book where I've been very critical of certain policies, certain attitudes, and what I try to do is give a balanced picture without making too many judgments. I think one can draw one's own conclusions from some of the things that I say. So I think this one event, the event of this immigration, is really the turning point in what's happened. Now, this is still very, very complicated, and the main reason it's complicated is that the Jewish community in Germany is what's called an Einheitsgemeinde, a unified community, which is very different than what we know here in North America. In the United States, if a group of people in a synagogue decide they don't like the rabbi or they don't want to be part of it, they go off and form a new synagogue. Well, this is not the way it works in Germany. There's a central council of Jews in Germany, which is the official spokes organization. This is the organization that deals with the government, and you have to remember in Germany that the church-state relations are not as in the United States. People pay taxes, the government gives money to the churches, and it makes a difference who's in charge and who speaks. And this is why many of the debates that are going on within the Jewish community in Germany are about power and about resources. So the Jewish community in Germany is not only a unified community, it's also a community that's primarily Orthodox, with some conservative elements, what's called liberal in Germany. The great irony, of course, is that the Reform Jewish movement, which started in Germany in the early 20th century, and where the first female Reform rabbi, Regina Jonas, was ordained, has not had, until very, very recently, a Reform community. and this is part of this entire constellation of problems in Jewish life, is that the Jewish community follows halakhic laws, which means one has to have a Jewish mother or an Orthodox conversion. But many, and some might even say most, of the Jews who have come from the former Soviet Union are not halakhically Jewish. The problem is that in the Soviet Union, being Jewish was considered a nationality. And on the fifth line of the passport, it was written Jewish. But that was, one would have that even if one's father was Jewish. And halakhically, you can't be Jewish if your father's Jewish, your mother's not. And so you have many, many Jews who have come to the former Soviet Union who might have a grandfather or father who's Jewish who cannot become members of the Jewish community. You also have many people who are nominally Jewish, meaning they know nothing about Jewish rituals, traditions, Jewish life. Many people used the category of Jewishness to get out of the Soviet Union and come to Germany. So one of the great problems is that the German government, as you can imagine, was very loose in who they let in, depending on how they define themselves as Jewish. And the German government was not one to tell Jews that you can't come to Germany if you want to come. So what happens is there were these thousands and thousands of Jews who were admitted to Germany. They come to the community, and the community has to evaluate whether they're halakhically Jewish or not. And this causes great problems. The problems that have been incurred by this issue, I talk about in one chapter on the immigration of the Jews from the former Soviet Union. It's very complicated because on the one hand, the Jews of Germany, or the Jewish community of Germany, needed these Jews to exist, to continue. If this had not happened, we sooner or later would not have much of a Jewish community. It was very old. There weren't many births. There was no future. So on the one hand, you have this opportunity for the Jewish community to be strong and growing and powerful in a certain way. And on the other hand, the problems that have come up have created many internal disputes. And some of this has to do with the resources for education, for social welfare, for language classes, for opportunities for the immigrants. Many of the immigrants feel that they're not welcomed by the community because they're Russians, or of course they don't speak the language, and so on and so on. And because of this, along with the fact that there have been movements in the last few years. For example, the World Union of Progressive Jewry, Reform Jewry, is coming back to Germany. Spurred by American Reformed Jews, there are now a number of Reformed groups in Germany, but they're not part of the official community. You also now have Chabad Lubavitch in Berlin, and the rabbi there who I interviewed is very enthusiastic, optimistic, and creative, and is finding more and more of these Russian Jews who are finding what he has to offer them appealing. You also have a number of other organizations, and they're primarily American. And this is a chapter that I also have. One chapter of the book is about American and Israeli relations with the Jews of Germany. You have organizations prominently like the American Jewish Committee, which has an office in Berlin, which has had an enormous impact on activities around Jewish life. Not only do they have a relationship to the German government and are an NGO that can speak outside the government, obviously, with the government, they also develop relations with the Jewish community in Germany. This relationship has not always been easy, because you can imagine that there's an internal or domestic Jewish community which is trying to make its position known, and you have an American powerful Jewish community like the HAC that comes in, and the indigenous community doesn't feel very good about that because they're left in the shadows. You also have the Ronald Lauder Foundation, which has established a Lehrhaus, a teaching institute to teach Jews, in this case only men, but teach Jewish men about Jewish life, Jewish rituals, Jewish tradition, to help create a more, what they would call a Jewish environment. There are synagogues springing up all over Germany. Interestingly, in many of these synagogues, especially in smaller towns, the constituency of the synagogue is 100% Russian. Now, that leads me to another one of the kind of flashpoints and difficult issues, is that for any of you who know the history of Jews in Germany or know the German Jewish tradition, the German Jews have always seen themselves as very different than the rest of the Jews, especially those from Eastern Europe. This was the case even in the concentration camps. The German Jews often didn't want to have anything to do with the Jews from the East. And it's ironic that there are very few German Jews from before the war. Many of the people who now call themselves German Jews in Germany are really Polish or Eastern European Jews who were DPs or came later and then became German, so to speak, and think of themselves as German. So there's also an interesting ethnic differentiation conflict that plays itself out within the community. So you have the financial, you have the resource issue, you have also the religious issue of how religious someone is. Are they Orthodox, are they conservative, are they Reformed? You also have the issue of ethnicity. Are they German Jews? Are they Polish Jews? Are they Russian Jews? And when I say Russian here, Soviet, I'm using that as a category to cover a number of different nationalities. They're not only Russians, they're Ukrainians. There are a lot of Jews from the three Baltic republics. So there's also a variety of Jews from the former Soviet Union. This leads me just to make an important theoretical point that's important for the project, which is in a project about identity, especially from the point of view from an American Jew, where identity, being Jewish in America, is not only a religious identity, it's also can be considered a kind of ethnic identity or cultural identity. This is a perspective that I try to bring through in the book when I offer some perspective on the future of the Jewish community, and I'll come back to that. And I try to be careful in the book not to be the know-it-all American who's writing a book to tell the German Jews what they should be doing. But what I try to do is bring another perspective that's based in the experience that I have here. And that experience is very much a different one. Now, before I go on, I think what I'd like to do, which I don't often do, but I think it might be interesting here, is to just read two passages from the book, which I think juxtaposed give you a sense of the difference in Germany. In 1995, for example, from the part where I quote the first passage, and 2004, the second passage. So if you allow me, I'll do this, and I think I try to make some points with this. And this is how I actually start out the book. Now, I would say that as a kind of mix between a literary critic, an ethnographer, and historian, I've used a number of different methods in the book. Some of them are textual. I read literary texts. I read speeches. I also do participant observation analysis, that I'm living among these people, I'm observing, I'm interviewing, I'm doing qualitative interviews. Of course, the book is also historical because I historicize this topic in chapter 2, where I have a chapter about the representation of the Holocaust in Germany and America from 1967 approximately to the end of the century. And I do this because there's no question that the Holocaust shadows the issue of what it means to be a Jew in Germany. That's obvious. And there are many debates that go on, and I talk about one of the prominent debates around the building of the Holocaust Memorial in Berlin, which was just opened this past year, to show the reader how fraught any issue that deals with Jewish topics is. So that even though Germany is, one might say, is a fairly small player, I mean, it's a big player in Europe, and there aren't that many Jews when you really think about it, it's a very small portion of the population. What happens in Germany with Jews is a topic that the whole world is interested in, not only Jews around the world, but others. So this becomes a gauge for important issues around history, around memory, around responsibility, belonging, and identity. That's one of the reasons that I think that people are interested in this topic. It's not a book about the Jews of Portugal. That would be an interesting topic too, but it would be a very different kind of book than what one writes when one writes about Jews in Germany. So if you'll allow me, I'll start out with which is a passage that I would talk about as an ethnographic passage, because I describe a situation, and it's a situation that I find very rich and pregnant with meaning that I then use to draw certain kinds of questions. As is often the case with everyday moments that turn into ethnographic material, my visit to a Berlin bagel shop on a Saturday morning, the Jewish Sabbath, in the mid-90s, was auspicious. My best friend, a tall, blue-eyed blonde German named Wolfgang, suggested we have breakfast in this new establishment. Knowing his penchant for Jewish specialties, I never expected to be exposed to a situation that even in its innocence gave me striking new insights into Jewish life in Germany since reunification. Even I, Berlin kenner or connoisseur of Berlin that I am, was not only surprised to find that such a place existed, a bagel store, but that it was one of three, and this one next to my beloved Jewish bookstore in the same building as the synagogue in the Joachimsthaler Straße. This is in Joachimsthaler Straße, this is in West Berlin. That the shop was open on the Sabbath did not surprise me, since it was probably owned by Gentiles. As I was having my lox and bagel, I thought, yes, it's just like America, even in its German incarnation with Käse, Tomaten, and Zwiebeln, cheese, tomatoes, and onions. Confirming the owner's proud claim that comes with a smile. Somehow I had never thought that I would ever be asking for this Eastern European delicacy so common in Ashkenazi-dominated America here in Yekkeland. Yekkeland is, say, I made that up, Yekkes are German Jews. I sat at the window, devoured my second bagel and lox, and watched the worshipers, mostly Russian Jews, leave Saturday morning services under the watchful eye of the security policeman who stands permanent guard at the synagogue, as is the case for all Jewish institutions in Germany. I pondered the juxtapositions, the Jewish American and the German, the Ostjüdisch or the Eastern European Jewish and the German, weekend peace and potential violence, and finally, the sacred and the profane. I was prompted to question the meaning of these contrasting images, trivial in and of themselves, yet powerfully significant in their relationship to each other in this particular context at this particular moment. This is especially true when they represent the cultural slippage that often takes place in Germany today when Jewish life is being represented even more than 50 years after the Holocaust. Okay, let me one more line. The overwhelming popularity of Jewish restaurants serving Jewish American or Israeli cuisine and Eastern European klezmer music presented as a German specialty testify to both the confusion and fascination with anything that seems Jewish. Okay, then I'm just going to continue with a passage of a description that took place just a year ago. Okay. In 2003, drinking a hot chocolate and eating a croissant, I sat in an Italian cafe a few blocks from the synagogue on the Oranienburger Straße. This is the one with the big gold cupola that you may have seen. And around the corner from another bagel shop. Sitting on one of the four stools, I watched the people of various races, ethnicities, and religions go by the large picture window that allows the patrons to enjoy the variety that is now Berlin. It's not unusual to see a man with a kippah, a skull cap or yarmulke, or a woman in a headscarf. Inside the warm and cozy cafe, no larger than a spacious closet, the owner speaks with his wife in Italian, chats in Turkish with one of the regular customers, while other patrons communicate in French or English, and a woman sits next to me nonchalantly reading an Israeli newspaper. Jews, as well as others who publicly demonstrate their difference in language, clothes, or symbols on the street, are no longer a strange appearance. Bagel shops, not necessarily Jewish ones, abound, as do other restaurants offering foreign cuisines in major cities like Berlin. What might have seemed virtual in the mid-90s, be it Jewish or other, now represents, as in North America, a more common experience for Jews and non-Jews alike in changing Germany. So, in those two passages, what I tried to do is to juxtapose, just in the period of 8 years, some differences that I observed. Now, these, of course, are very specific to my own experience, and one can't make broad generalizations. But the point that I wanted to make was, and it's something that goes throughout this book, is that I'm looking at the situation of Jews in Germany, not only in the relationships they have with each other, but also relationships that are established in Germany or not established between Jews and other groups of minorities, in this case here Turks, and that Germany as a multicultural country, whether it likes it or not, de facto does have the demography, has to come to terms with the whole notion of what it means to be different. And this issue of difference, whether it be Jewish or Turkish or something else, is an issue that really inflects the problem that I focused the book on, which is the subject of Jewish difference, or any kind of difference in Germany, or identity, is not just about Jews, or not just about Turks, but in some ways this book is just as much about German identity. Because as I see the process of identities forming and the dynamic construction of identities, that as the Jewish population changes, as the Turkish population becomes more or less integrated, as other peoples come to Germany, and as Germany becomes increasingly an immigration country, which it didn't call itself for so long, it's clear that German identity has to change as well. So that this is not a one-way street. It's not simply what's the situation for the Jews, but as definitions of identity change for these minorities in relationship to the majority culture, the Germans, also change and have to think differently about who they are. Now I come to this, again, I come to this problem very much as an American, with the American viewpoint, which I thematize all the way through. There's a tradition in the United States, in the 60s at least, between African Americans and Jews. There's a notion of solidarity that exists in America between minority groups of different kinds. And this has not been the case in Germany. So what I'm trying to do is to try to maybe help not only educate an American or American Jewish population to the realities of German life in a much more differentiated way, but I'm also trying to help the Germans maybe think about a different way that they might define themselves. And as some of you know, these debates play themselves out every day in Germany, whether it's about the establishment of a Holocaust monument and who should be included in the monument, whether it's about the Jewish Museum, whether it's about some other example of representing what it means to be Jewish or to be German. These issues of identity are much more prominent than they are even in the United States. It's an issue that the Germans occupy themselves with, whether they like it or not. Recently in Germany, with the discussion of the bombings of Dresden and Hamburg, the fire bombings, there's been a whole new discussion about victimhood. So my point is that this book, while it talks about Jewish life in Germany per se, it raises a number of other issues that have resonance. And I just want to mention a few of those and then conclude. I mentioned the issue of, there's a chapter on the Holocaust. I talk also about Jews and Turks. I also have a section about American, as I said, and Israeli influences. Just one example. In the mid-90s, Ezra Weizmann, the president of Israel, came to Germany. At the time, Ignaz Bubis was the director of the Central Council of Jews in Germany. Bubis was a very forthright and popular and public figure who spoke out very forthright on many issues, not only issues that dealt with Jewish topics. He spoke out about xenophobia, he spoke out about racism. Mr. Weizmann made it very clear, and he made statements to the effect that he couldn't understand why Jews would want to live in Germany. And Bubis tried to make it clear to him that this was a question that while many Jews in Germany asked themselves, that they obviously didn't have as much a problem with it as he did because they were living there. 6, 7 years later, I think it was in 2002 or 2003, Moshe Katsav came to Germany. In fact, he came to Berlin on the occasion of the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe Conference on Anti-Semitism, the largest anti-Semitism conference that ever taken place, and one that was taking place precisely in Berlin, purposely. And many German government figures spoke to the fact that, isn't it ironic, and it's how sad, that this is the city from whence came Hitler's final solution, but now there was a major conference going on in Berlin, which the German government was hosting, and that major German figures came to and spoke. When Moshe Katsav, there were no statements about why do Jews live in Germany. He went to visit the opening of a synagogue in Wuppertal. He had discussions with German high officials and so on. It was a very different event. And one of the points that I think is very interesting for American Jews to understand, that many don't, is that Israel is Germany's best friend in Europe. Israel and Germany have had a long-standing and extremely close relationship, what's called really the special relationship. And generally, I would say, and we can't really make broad statements, that certainly sometimes one thinks that Israelis have less of a problem with Germany than American Jews do. There are cultural, academic, scientific relations. The German government provides military training and equipment for the Israeli army. The two special secret services work together, and on and on and on. There are many Israelis living in Berlin. There are many Israelis living in Germany. Now, this is just to say that another point that I think that has to be added to this mix is for American Jews to understand that Israel and Germany are very close. Israel and the United States are very close. Those are Israel's two best friends. Finally, let me just say that what I also talk about in the book is how Jews are represented. So much of the experience of people who deal with others in stereotypes and cliches has to do with the representation of those people, how people construct others in their imagination, and not so much how the people really confront each other on the street. So I talk about some of the German Jewish writers, of which there are many. I talk about some of the prominent Jewish German journalists who speak and write in public fora, not only in Jewish fora. And I have a long discussion of the Jewish Museum and the history of the debate around the Jewish Museum, as well as the exhibit, with its good sides and bad. But clearly, with the Jewish Museum, as the American Jewish politician and now museum director Michael Blumenthal says, he didn't want the museum to be a Holocaust museum. He wanted it to be a museum that documented the 2,000-year history of Jewish life in Germany. And that Jewish life and German life are very much part of each other, that the Jewish story is the German story, and vice versa. And finally, at the end, I try to, and I'll just make a point about some of the claims that I'm making. In the last chapter, I talk about this issue of Jewish-German identity as it's developing now with the new immigration. And I make a claim that while the German-Jewish tradition that was so rich died out in 1933, at the beginning of the war and then through the Holocaust, that my suspicion is that over the next generations there'll be a new German-Jewish life in Germany. But it won't be a German-Jewish life that is the German-Jewish life previous to the war, but the term German-Jewish will mean something else. Just as these identities evolve, the terms used to describe them evolve as well. And being a German Jew, which is something one hasn't said for decades, may be possible again, but it'll be a very different kind of German Jew. It'll be a largely, probably in part Russian-speaking, although the children are all learning German. It'll be one that's very European. And of course, this is another reason why many of the Jews from the former Soviet Union come to Germany, because it's Europe, it's familiar, it's close, it's safer. And of course, there are financial possibilities. But this idea of a new German Jewry plays into a topic that Yossi Shane here at Georgetown is really the expert on, is about diaspora. And I even make a claim that perhaps what happens in Germany with the new German Jewish identity may become a model for other kinds of constructions of Jewish identities that are interacting forcefully in some ways, not always out of desire, with the indigenous communities in ways that will create a different notion of diaspora, and also perhaps a different relationship between the diaspora and Israel. And finally, since I'm in the CCT program, Communication Culture Technology, I have a large section which is about virtual Jews, which is about the ways that the internet is contributing in Europe and Germany to helping people who are Jewish around Europe connect to each other, how they're helping people like Russian immigrants learn about what it means to be Jewish, and how it even helps Jewish singles around Europe meet each other for potential marriage. Finally, I guess, what I would say is what the book does is tries to come at the topic of Jewish life in Germany from multiple levels simultaneously. Rather than a single narrative, there are many different stories, but it's like a kaleidoscope, as someone referred to it, as keeps changing, and I have different layers that I build on top of each other. At the end, I hope that one has a full picture, but it's a full, not a complete picture, but a fuller picture based on these various perspectives. But essentially, it's about what is the role of Jewish life in Germany within the community, within Germany, within Europe, in relationship to the United States and Israel, and in the global community. So ultimately, I end the book with a discussion of the relationship of identity to globalization. So thank you.